Let's pull up this story from the Post-Millennial. Hamas leader says the same type of racism that killed George Floyd is being used by Israel against the Palestinians.
Where is that quote? I want to hear the.
All right.
أنا أغتنم هذه الفرصة وإحنا بنعيش ذكرى القتل المجرم العنصري لجورج فلويد. جورج فلويد قتل في مثل هذه الأيام نتيجة منهجية عنصرية موجودة لدى أشخاص. اليوم هذه العنصرية التي قتل بها جورج فلويد يمارسها الاحتلال ضدنا وضد أهلنا.
Right.
That makes Israel the Derek Chauvin of the world.
They just know our
George Floyd.
buzzwords.
You know what? All right. If that's his argument, I agree. George Floyd was chewing on a speedball behind the wheel of a car. The police officers were trying to stop him because what he was doing could result in the death of children and himself. He begged to be released from the car and then was placed on the ground with a lethal amount of various drugs in his system. Officers were trying to subdue him as he was screaming and resisting. Eventually, he ended up dying. Now, should they have had Chauvin had his knee on his back for 9+ minutes? Maybe not. Maybe they should have no, they shouldn't have. He should have gotten medical attention immediately. The dude was dying, presumably due to, well, I think the official reporting is that it was cardiac arrest due to pressure. But let's just say the dude had, this is also a fact, he had lethal amounts of, I think, fentanyl and other drugs in his system, including meth. Mm-hmm. So if this guy is arguing that they're just like George Floyd, it's like, okay, so you're saying that you're like chock full of crazy ass drugs and you're engaging in behaviors that's putting yourselves and others at risk. And now Israel is trying to stop you from doing that.
That didn't work the way you thought it would.
Here's the argument. Should George Floyd have been allowed to have chew a speedball and drive an SUV?
Certainly not.
No. Should the police have made an attempt to stop him from doing it?
Yeah.
What do you think? You're more libertarian.
Oh, man. What was happening when that went down?
He was sitting behind the wheel of the SUV, presumably in a drug deal. What we think happened is that when the cops came up, he started chewing on the speedball, spit it out on the floor, crazy amount of drugs in his system. They removed him from the vehicle and asked him to sit down. Then they were going to bring him to their SUV for an arrest. Should they have done that? Or should they have just said, just stay in the vehicle and do your drugs?
If they have probable cause, they pull him out.
So the problem with the George Floyd story then is they handled it irresponsibly.
Sure.
When they held him on the ground.
Absolutely.
In the body cam footage, George Floyd is saying, "Put me on the ground, put me on the ground, put me on the ground," over and over again. And so they agree to. Chauvin shows up later, not knowing what's going on, and then puts his knee. His knee is around the neck and the upper back. It's widely disputed. They then call medical, which arrives 9 or so minutes later. In the criminal trial for Chauvin, the use of force expert for the prosecution said Chauvin used a lower amount of force than was authorized. Locking him up was clearly political. He was authorized to actually tase George Floyd, which is an escalation of force, and chose not to.
Yeah, what he did wasn't
still
legal.
the wrong
But it's
force.
what?
It's still the wrong force. It's less force, but it's dangerous and irresponsible to put your knee on someone's neck.
That's the argument. It's disputed whether or not it was actually on his neck or not.
Sure. It was like, was it on his upper back?
So the issue is, if someone is engaging in behavior that could result in death, are you to blame if you engage in actions that try to stop them from committing violent acts? So if a guy, let's say, has a gun, and he's on drugs, and he's holding that gun,
Yeah.
and he's waving it around,
Yeah.
and then you tell him to drop it, and then he staggers about, falls over, and then you're like, "Hey, man, this guy's going to shoot somebody." Then he raises the gun up at you and you shoot him. Should you go to jail?
I just don't think it's comparable to what's going on over there. Unfortunately, this Hamas leader just totally shot himself in the foot with this awful argument.
Well, but this is my point. The argument being made by Hamas is that they are drug addicts engaging in extremely dangerous behavior that will kill others and themselves, and Israel is trying to stop them.
Well,
but he mostly said it just to invoke sympathy from the right people.
He's just
No, but I'm going to give it to him. I'm going to give it to him.
You're going to give it to him. Well, I think it's unfortunate that everyone in Palestine is getting caught up in his awful, awful argument.
What if the people in Palestine, I don't know, like rose up and like captured and arrested all of the Hamas people and said, "Stop doing this"?
That would be amazing.
Why aren't they doing that?
I think they're terrified of Hamas.
So they vote for him?
And some of them, I mean, when Libby Owens was on the other day, she was saying one of the things Hamas did was offer social services. So some people have a relationship with Hamas that at one point was in some ways positive, even if the things they're doing now are negative.
It's a very complicated relationship. Some of them I'm sure are deeply resentful and also feel tied to it. It's like a battered husband, battered wife relationship. Probably someone over there is essentially held hostage.
And there are ultimately always going to be Palestinians who feel as though Israel is in the wrong for being there at all.
Absolutely.
Even if they're not sympathetic to Hamas, they don't want to dispute the land they feel entitled to.
Yeah.
One of the first things I saw after the initial airstrike, after Israel's first initial airstrike, was that it was the picture, oddly enough, of it says, "This is what it looks like after Israel dropped bombs on Gaza." And he says, "Just kidding. This is Minneapolis after the George Floyd riots in 2020. Right. So that actually ties those together even more.
Yeah.
Because it looked almost the same, because Minneapolis was destroyed.
As the same way that we might know the names of, some random people that come out of social movements in other countries, I really just think that there is no understanding of the implications of what invoking George Floyd mean, other than it makes leftists in America sympathetic to your cause because they believe it's a racial argument. In fact, all the leftists in America probably have no idea what the nuanced situation is. They just know there are certain sides you're supposed to fall on, and they're attempting to.
We don't really fully understand what it's like to vote in an election where part of the dominant faction of your government is essentially a terrorist organization. What are the implications of arguing against them? What happens when you come out vocally against Hamas in Palestine? That's not something that we really understand over here.
Actually, a lot of them probably would say that about the American government, right?
Yeah.
They would actually say that.
They would say that about us.
Every time we vote for an election here in America, we're voting for a terrorist faction.
They would say that about us.
That's what I'm saying. Like they would take that position the same way that people here are taking that position when they talk about Palestinians voting for,
A big difference here, though, is that when our government engages in atrocities, it's overseas. It's not in like Mexico, at least not yet. We haven't elected anyone yet who's saying that they're going to go to war in Mexico. Although
maybe we should, man, because the border is weak.
We should not go to. Do we want Palestine and Gaza?
I'm just kidding. Although I do think we should secure the border. I mean, there is obvious conflict at the border, and there is obviously a level that you could be classified as an invasion, and we don't do anything about it. In fact, we are only interested right now in spending money abroad in Ukraine, in Israel, in Palestine, and although humanitarianly you want to offer support to those who are suffering, especially those you might consider your ally, we are not ultimately putting the people of Texas, of Arizona, and the
Hawaii.
states are after that. Hawaii also, the northern border is extremely porous. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. So people of upstate New York, people of Vermont, people of Maine, we put them last in this scenario. And that's ultimately the U.S. government's biggest failing in this situation.
That's the most annoying part. Like Hawaii wasn't that long ago. Like our attention spans and our memories that short that in between, our ninth funding of Ukraine and what happened between Israel and Palestine is that we had several things. East Palestine here. All sorts of things are happening here that our tax dollars. What did they get? $700 in Hawaii per household or something?
Nothing.
Not even per person.
Not even per person.
Right. So there's plenty of things that our tax dollars could be used here in America, and I think that does resonate with the average person. I'd like to believe that the average person who's saying look, I just want to see the less nuanced position of I just want everybody. I'm voting for peace. I want peace. Right. What they also mean is we need to focus on what's going on here.
Absolutely.
There's plenty to do here.
And I don't think that's even people are calling that isolationism. I don't think it's isolationism. It's just purely trying to make something happen in your own country.
Is isolationism bad? Is it always
I don't think it's totally bad.
Isolationism would mean that we're not engaging in free trade and having diplomacy.
Exactly, which is why I'm saying it's not isolationism.
Yeah, doesn't always sound awful. That doesn't always sound awful. The thing is, we just do crazy things when we're on the global stage. We're not consistent, and I just don't know. It's not that I think we shouldn't engage in free trade, but ultimately, the idea that we have to be involved in everything, everywhere, all the time does not serve the American people.
Exactly.
And they
just a hint, a whisper of isolationism, please.
And they say look, if you're going to help somebody else, you have to help yourself first. You need to on a plane.
No, we're not going to put on our oxygen mask.
Secure your mask first before you help someone else. We could do with helping ourselves first.
But I think what many people fail to realize is that this argument is essentially like the chickens in the chicken coop complaining that we only buy certain feed, and why are we spending money outside of the chicken coop? Right. We take their eggs, they're paying their taxes, and then they're like, hey, you realize the people who run this show are wasting our food and resources on other houses and other chicken coops. Like, what's this all about? The chickens have no authority. Their say means nothing. So we sit here and we're like, the American people are upset about what's going on. Bro, since the end of World War II, international interests have superseded U.S. interests.
Yes.
The purpose of the petrodollar, the International Monetary Fund, Visa and MasterCard, what the American people want is immaterial to what the massive international institutions are trying to do and what they want.
I hope more and more people shift their buying power, their savings, out of the U.S. dollar and into Bitcoin. I think that we need to starve the banks.
Uh-oh. Elizabeth Warren's going to put you on a list.
I know.
Yeah, but maybe they want Bitcoin.
Well, they don't get it. That's just not how Bitcoin works. That's how other cryptocurrency might work. They can get into that, but not in Bitcoin.
Well, why not? What do you think?
Well, you can't print Bitcoin into oblivion.
Yeah, but you can buy it all.
Oh, can you? Other
Yeah.
people own it.
Right, you buy it from them.
We don't know who all owns it.
So the U.S. government, if they're really concerned about Bitcoin, look, I like Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's good. I have Bitcoin. But if the U.S. government's really concerned about Bitcoin with $33 trillion in debt, yeah, they could buy out Bitcoin.
I don't know about that. I think that
They could.
That's
The only way they couldn't is that some people would not sell.
there you go.
But that's not enough.
There's a lot of people who really, really hate the U.S. dollar who own a lot of Bitcoin.
So it's
there's
in
a
the-
lot of wealthy people in Dubai who have a lot of Bitcoin too,
And see, in the interest of the United States to buy as much Bitcoin as possible.
but they're not doing it. They want it.
You don't know if they are.
They're too hubristic. They're too hubristic.
Perhaps, but I kind of think they would. And this is the argument that I made to a bunch of my anarchist and libertarian friends. If you were say like a council on foreign relations
Okay.
or something like that, and you believed in some kind of like liberal economic order you're trying to create so that you could control the flow of currency around the world, what you need is a universal trade medium. The U.S. dollar is great, but doesn't penetrate literally everywhere. We do pretty well with it, right? So you want a one world currency. You want everyone using the same currency. Well, how do you go about doing that? Every time you bring up something like a multinational currency or an international currency, all these crackpot conspiracy theorists, libertarians, and anarchists start losing their minds. I got an idea. What if we seed them into promoting our universal global currency and get them to be the advocates for it? True. There's an idea. So the first thing we'll do is we will create a digital currency that tracks everything you do. So we'll know every purchase you make. We'll be able to track it publicly and openly. You won't be able to hide it because it's not Monero, it's not Zcash, it's Bitcoin. And then what we'll do is we'll go to all the libertarians and tell them, hey, this is anti-government money. Meanwhile, we're the ones secretly holding the bulk of it, and they won't be able to track it because we have the machines and we know the plan and they don't. Then you get a bunch of libertarians being like, I'm going to buy this up. They get really wealthy off of it, start advocating for it to be the thing to buy. But Bitcoin, if you're using it for other transactions, everything you do is tracked publicly. That's surveillance state 101.
But it's so safe, Tim. Everyone's so safe.
Oh, look, I
now.
like Bitcoin. I like Bitcoin. There's a lot of great things about it. I like crypto in general.
I don't like crypto in general. I think that it opens the door for central bank digital
That's what I
currencies.
was. That was joking about being safe, isn't safe by the government. They're taking care of us all.
But I do
that's-
think
that's
there's
okay.
a big difference between Bitcoin and general.
Oh,
cryptocurrency.
definitely.
There is, but the main challenge with Bitcoin is that everything you do is publicly tracked, and the government will always know every purchase you've ever made.
yeah.
And they want to get rid of cash, and it's libertarians advocating for switching over to a completely digital currency that is tracked by the government.
No. I'm not advocating for switching over completely. I'm saying we need.
I'm
to
not saying
get
you.
off
I'm saying the
US
libertarians
dollar.
are. Massively
people.
advocating for. Well, sure. I mean, I'd say the Libertarian Party has the official position that everybody should adopt Bitcoin, but it's overwhelmingly the libertarians who made Bitcoin successful.
It's good. I'm holding out. I don't think it's the government. I think that this is a smart move, and we need to diversify and get off the US
Do you
dollar.
think the Bitcoin is accessible to the average American? Meaning, like, what kind of financial literacy do you need to have to be able to get into Bitcoin? Because I think there are a lot of people who
I think
get a fair. They hear these stories about malfunctions or whatever else, and they get scared of Bitcoin.
I think probably a good 8 hours of learning about it.
That's
would-
more than we get in high school in America.
just a good
Rough.
a good 8 hours, and you probably could figure out how to use it safely.
Do you think that everybody should be using it as their day-to-day currency,
Not yet.
but eventually?
Maybe we need to make it easier to use.
If
Lightning Network and things like that.
so,
We're not there
aren't,
yet.
Aren't those components of it more centralized though, and run by like big tech guys in Silicon Valley?
No. I don't think that
Lightning
people
Network?
should be using major trading platforms. If that makes sense, I think
So-
people need to be a little bit safer when they use it.
The challenge is,
exchanges,
the reason why Bitcoin forked so many times is because large portions of the community disagree with each other, and, it's direct democracy. So what happens is 51% of the people running Bitcoin decide a rule change comes into effect, and then just boot out the other 49, who now still will have that forked currency, but that creates Bitcoin Cash and all these other derivatives of Bitcoin because people disagree with the changes being implemented by the majority.
It's okay that there's some choice in currency.
Sure. Yeah. That's why I think Bitcoin's good. But I don't know if I believe in this total Bitcoin world.
Don't get me wrong. I don't think it needs to be total Bitcoin world. I think this is a good way to push back against the US dollar.
But so what world is that? Is that some of the trade we do is in Bitcoin, some of it is in dollars?
I think, well, it doesn't even necessarily have to be US dollars. You're going to have to push off of the dollar and push against it and see what happens.
What do you trade with?
Right now,
Bitcoin?
You've got Bitcoin. People are also, they still have gold and silver. There are gold bugs out there. I'm not so
But you're
much
not
into
trading
that.
with gold and silver.
Yeah,
right. The value of gold and silver is too great based on its
Sure.
weight. So you could do the gold backs, for instance, but then it's just people look at you side-eyed like you're giving me
They
a
do.
polymer enclosed gold foil bill. What is this?
Let's
Bring
move
back the pirates and their doubloons. I feel
Let's
like that would
move
be a good
more
time.
onto Bitcoin and see what happens with the dollar.
My biggest
We
concern
need
is
to
that
weaken the Federal Reserve.
and I agree with that, but my concern about Bitcoin is that the government will be able to track everything you do.
I think it's a little doomer. They can already track everything we do.
Yeah, but not when you buy things in cash. Or at the very
It
least,
depends on how large of a transaction it is in cash.
even then,
Because
there's
if it's
a lot
going
of,
into a bank, it's being tracked.
and banks aren't even giving out certain deposits. But if you go buy something, even 10 grand in cash, you have a choice of whether you're following the law or not. Like my attitude is just pay your taxes, but there is a bit more leeway in. So I'll put it this way. Moxie Marlinspike made a great point about why there needs to be room for people to commit illegal acts.
Yeah.
And the
agreed.
argument he made was marijuana. Everybody right now is starting. This is years ago. I interviewed him. He said we're starting to see the legalization of recreational and medicinal marijuana.
Yep.
But how would people know they wanted it legal if they never tried it? There has to be a little bit of give in the system. Otherwise, it only flows in one direction.
Sure.
And I'm like, that's actually completely correct. If things become illegal and then you are prevented from ever seeing it or hearing it or touching it, eventually we all live in gray boxes. We don't own anything and everything's illegal. There has to be a way to push back and test the boundaries and be like, wait, actually, this shouldn't be illegal. So the challenge with Bitcoin is that I see everything you do will be completely tracked and is, and not just by the government, but by any other nefarious actors and foreign governments.
Well, you can use Monero if you're uncomfortable with Bitcoin.
Right. So that's why I like crypto,
Sure.
not just Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Bitcoin
So much
itself is good.
So much out there that's so bad, though, in
Yeah,
crypto.
but that's like saying, I bought, pyrite and it turned out not to have been gold. I got scammed. It's like, okay, well, someone scammed you.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean gold is bad, So crypto I like.
I think we agree.
Yeah. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.